Welcome to the TruthLover video podcast, although today it's an audio podcast presented by Love and Truth Party. I am your host, Will Pye, author, speaker, transformational coach, and founder of Love and Truth Party. Love and Truth Party is a self-organizing, self-replicating community and movement of love and awakening, a wisdom school facilitating health, healing, and happiness. Find us and join our mailing list at loveandtruthparty.org. We exist to empower the deep realization and integration of unitive consciousness of one human being and to inspire action in the world from this clarity as New Earth ninjas, our playful avatar. Our projects include distributing 1 million love letters from the universe, inviting people to receive the love and care in these and within the happiness hacks and other free resources found on loveandtruthparty.org. Our online courses, The Alchemy of Cancer and The Alchemy of Depression, empower the creation of health, healing, and happiness. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Lissa Rankin. Lissa Rankin, MD, is a New York Times best-selling author of Mind Over Medicine, The Fear Cure, and The Anatomy of a Calling. Lissa is a physician, speaker, founder of the Whole Health Medicine Institute, and mystic. And she is passionate about what makes people optimally healthy and what predisposes them to illness. She's on a mission to merge science and spirituality in a way that not only facilitates the health of the individual, but also uplifts the health of the collective. Bridging between seemingly disparate worlds, Lissa is a connector, collaborator, curator, and amplifier, broadcasting not only her unique visionary ideas, but also those of cutting-edge visionaries she discerns and trusts, especially in the field of her latest research into sacred medicine. Lissa has starred in 2 national public television specials and also leads workshops both online and at retreat centers like Esalen and Kripalu. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her daughter. She blogs at lissarankin.com and posts regularly on Facebook, and her latest book is The Daily Flame, which you can pre-order today. Wonderful to have you here with us today, Lissa. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
And we're having a little chat about what we might want to explore and what's alive for you. And you shared a little bit of some conversations you're having with people in your community. And so we talked about self-healing and following your inner pilot, and I think broadly beyond that, living a life where we're following our inner pilot light. And perhaps just to begin, you can help our listeners understand what you mean when you say following our inner pilot light. What's this referring to?
Well, I'm using a metaphor here for something that every spiritual tradition has a different word for. And so in order to avoid choosing sides, I kind of started calling this divine spark, this kind of essence of God consciousness, of whatever you want to call it from your own tradition, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature. Like I said, every tradition has their own description of it. And the inner pilot light metaphor kind of came to me because, a lot of people feel like they don't have access to this part of themselves. They're experiencing maybe a dark night of the soul. And so they feel like there's no light in there. My pilot light has gone out. But unlike kind of stove pilot lights, which can every now and then actually go out, I think of this as the spark that is the life force that animated you, from the moment you became a being in form. And, will animate you until you are no longer in this body. And that perhaps we come from the great flame and we will go back to the great flame. And for a little while, we think we're a little spark and we call ourselves whatever we call ourselves. And we are that unique individual expression that's not the same, right? So it's the paradox again. We are one and I am different than you. And so I think of the inner pilot light as the unique, sacred quality of precious individuality that is separate, and that we can celebrate our separateness in this kind of playful way of existing in the world, knowing that we were once the great flame, but then also celebrating what the Hindus would call the sort of divine feminine, or the goddess, the Shakti. So I think of the inner pilot light kind of as that Shakti, but it's also connected. It's like the portal to the one. So I love, can I read something real quick? This is Mark Nepo, and I love the way he's described this, because I can't describe it better than this. Each person is born with an unencumbered spot, free of expectation and regret, free of ambition and embarrassment, free of fear and worry, an umbilical spot of grace where we were each first touched by God. To know this spot of inwardness is to know who we are, not by surface markers of identity, not by where we work or what we wear or how we like to be addressed, but by feeling our place in relation to the infinite and by inhabiting it. This is a hard, lifelong task, for the nature of becoming is a constant filming over of where we begin, while the nature of being is a constant erosion of what is not essential. Each of us lives in the midst of this ongoing tension, growing tarnished or covered over, only to be worn back to that incorruptible spot of grace at our core. When the film is worn through, we have moments of enlightenment, moments of wholeness, moments of satori, as the Zen sages term it, moments of clear living when inner meets outer, moments of full integrity of being, moments of complete oneness. And whether the film is a veil of culture, of memory, of mental or religious training, of trauma or sophistication, the removal of that film and the restoration of that timeless spot of grace is the goal of all therapy and education. Regardless of subject matter, this is the only thing worth teaching, how to uncover that original center and how to live there once it is restored. We call the filming over a deadening of heart, and the process of return, whether brought about through suffering or love, is how we unlearn our way back to God.
That's beautiful.
Thank you, Mark Nepo, for trying to explain what, although I'm a writer who's been writing books for 10 years, is this kind of ineffable, numinous quality of our beingness. It's really hard to put language to it. He did it perfectly.
Yeah, it's the ongoing challenge of the writer, isn't it? Especially with such terms and such depth to bring words. And I agree, Mark's done a pretty outstanding job there. And you were speaking of bringing that into sort of the practical. It seems silly to say to bring it into the practical utility, but within the space of health and healing, I think you were talking about connecting with this essence, connecting with this inner pilot light, with that divine spark as a way of living life in general and broadly. And to dial into that specific, when we're on a journey of creating physical health or emotional healing, this seems to be a really, really key and perhaps underemphasized piece of that process of self-healing. You were talking about a conversation you were having where someone was frustrated or disappointed that they hadn't successfully yet created that self-healing. And I wonder if you can speak to what you've observed in your own journey and as a professional. How important, what role does that inner pilot light play on a journey of health and healing?
Well, I think it's fundamental. In my book, Mind Over Medicine, and in my first 2 TED Talks, I talked about what I call the whole health cairn, which is a wellness model. And at its foundation, at the base of this wellness model, which is modeled after like a stack of stones, like balanced stones, like people call it a cairn. And the foundation stone is the inner pilot light. And it's basically talking about how in order to optimize what I call whole health, then we have to be in balance with our inner pilot light, in alignment with our inner pilot light, in our relationships, our work, our sex lives, our creativity, our spiritual lives, our mental health, our environment, our relationship to money. And yes, we can take care of the body and we can eat the right things and we can work out with our personal trainers and we can do all of the, take a bunch of supplements, but that is one stone of 10 in the whole health cairn. And those other 9 stones usually get neglected in the conventional medical system. And so, you know, I come from a background as a Western medical doctor, trained at places like Duke and Northwestern, and my father was also a physician. So the whole idea of self-healing was not even on my radar. I mean, by the time I was 33 years old, I was taking 7 drugs for a whole host of chronic health conditions that my doctors assured me I would have to take for the rest of my life. And so it didn't even occur to me to challenge their authority because I believed in the system. And I think that's pretty common. Like, I was very mainstream in that way. I was raised in a strict Christian church, which, you know, Jesus could facilitate healings, but it wasn't something you could do yourself. And I was raised in the very strict dogma of conventional medicine, which is that the doctor knows best and has 12 years of training and is an expert. And if you're a wise human being, if you're sick, then you're going to give your power away to the doctor and let the doctor tell you what to do, without questioning it or challenging it or filtering it through the wisdom and knowing of your inner pilot light. So, you know, I remember somebody giving me a copy of some new age book when I was a doctor, and it was like, you can heal yourself. And I was like, ha, that's so cute. I was amused. And I looked at it, and it was like this list of health conditions you could look up, and oh, if your neck is sore, then here's what it means, and all of this stuff. And I was like, okay, that's so juvenile, right? They have no idea. And I've gone to school forever so that I know your body better than you do, Will. So surely I know what's best for you better than you do. And it was really quite arrogant. I feel quite embarrassed at kind of how I approached things back in those days. But equally so, when I was the patient, I gave my power to the authorities, the same way I expected patients to give their authority to me. So I really have developed a great curiosity and fascination with, and also gratitude and like immense awe, like immense respect for this aspect of myself, which has guided my own journey. I was off of all of my drugs within a year of doing the first thing my inner pilot light told me to do, which was quit my job as a doctor in the hospital. And I had no idea. I had a newborn baby and a husband who wasn't working, and I had a mortgage and medical school debt and no idea what else I would do in the world. So that sounds like an absolutely crazy instruction. Absolutely insane. That's all well and good that my inner pilot light is telling me that, right? But that's not practical, and this is the real world. And so it was pretty shocking to me to see that as I started actually being obedient to the guidance that was coming from this center of my being, that I got off all of my drugs. I've been off of them for more than 10 years now. And I started working with physicians and patients in a whole new way to help reorient people towards what's possible when we are able to, deepen our connection to that divine spark and learn to communicate with it, learn to be able to open ourselves to receiving instructions or to asking it for help when we are trying to make decisions or solving problems, or even trying to bring into being things that we yearn for that have not yet come into being. And so, part of what I'm teaching in my new book, The Daily Flame, which is a daily devotional of 365 love letters from your inner pilot light, based on an email that I've been sending out daily for 10 years to 30,000 people who read these daily love letters. But part of what I teach in all of those emails and in this book is that essentially your inner pilot light is your most reliable healer. This is the best doctor you're ever going to find. It's the most reliable therapist that can help you heal your trauma. It's the most wise spiritual teacher helping you open the portal to real universal wisdom, like truth, and kind of knowing that, any spiritual teacher worth their salt is speaking from that place and speaking to it in you. And yet the paradox, so this is the part that we were talking about before we got on, Will, the paradox is that kind of teaching can be misinterpreted. And I think the whole self-help industry does a huge disservice by suggesting that any problem that you have or anything that you want that you don't have yet, any issue that you're wrestling with can be solved by yourself. And that's a very comforting message. We would really like to think that it's possible to be independent and self-sufficient, to be the rugged individualist who can do it myself. But I think that teaching is very potentially harmful, especially when you're dealing with people with physical illness, where if they misinterpret that message, then they hear, I caused my cancer and it's not going away, so I must not be healing myself good enough. And I think that's a potentially extremely untrue and misleading and potentially damaging teaching, in that it interrupts what is perhaps one of the most important things that people learn from a healing journey, which is that we are not able to do it alone, and we do need to ask for help, and we do need to surrender ourselves to the mystery of all of this, and really humble ourselves in the presence of something that is out of our control. And instead of employing all of these strategies to try to run away from the discomfort that uncertainty creates, that perhaps we're better off learning to be in the uncertainty and finding tools and practices that help us feel at peace even when we're not in control. So I believe we participate with our healing, but we don't control it. And I believe that our bodies have incredible capacity to heal themselves, and so do our psyches. But we also, it requires us to go into territory that can be so tender that I think we often need the facilitation of a person with a high enough vibration that they can sort of entrain us into that vibration with love and compassion and the ability to witness and hold space, so that your inner pilot light can heal you in the presence of somebody else who can hold that compassionate space. So it really is, I think, a paradox.
Right. And I think with that self-help message that you're identifying as being unhelpful in some ways, it's like you can help yourself, you can heal yourself is the message, but it's like there's a subtlety to it. Like, what does that actually mean? Because I'm hearing you pointing to that our ability to connect with a part of ourselves that may not always be recognized as valid or existing, the quiet voice. I know that my experience of intuition or the inner pilot light, it's often not in thought, it's often not noisy, it's more of a knowing than perhaps a voice. So I'm wondering, I know in my experience, I think a lot of people can probably relate listening to having the experience of not listening to your intuition or your knowing, and finding how that works or doesn't work. I'm wondering what you can say about how we can learn to listen better, how we can learn to open to that inner pilot light more effectively.
I have several things I want to say in response to what you just said, because first of all, the inner pilot light may communicate with us in many ways, and most people have one or two ways that are easier to receive than others. So for example, some people that I know, their inner pilot lights speak to them very reliably and very clearly through a somatic response.
Mm-hmm.
So they can literally ask their inner pilot light any binary question, and the trick is getting the question right and not asking more than one question at a time.
Mm.
So for example, you wouldn't want to put three questions in the same inquiry.
Mm.
So you wouldn't want to say, is it aligned for me to move to Boston or New York? You might want to say first, is it aligned for me to move from where I am? Mm-hmm. And then you might want to ask, is it aligned for me to move to Boston? And as a separate inquiry, is it aligned for me to move to New York? But those people that have mastered this are able to come up with the right binary questions, and they can ask their body and they get a very clear yes or no from a somatic response, a kind of body compass. And the trick is in asking the right question. Some people, however, myself included, because of my medical training, the disembodiment of that practice of 12 years of having to deny how my body felt, like to work when I was tired and keep operating when I was hungry and not scrub out when I had to go to the bathroom and, retract in painful positions where my shoulders were all tense. I became quite disembodied. And so the embodiment part of my journey has been one of the hardest because of that somatic trauma and that dissociation from the body. So my inner pilot light has a harder time. I am so jealous of the people that are really somatic, because it really can be that simple. Yes, no. And the body will, I have two friends that are very somatic that way, and it's hysterical because we'll be at a restaurant and I'm reading through the menu, like trying to decide which thing I want to order. And they're literally going through each item of the menu, asking the body, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And their bodies are responding. So they're like twerking around like they're having a seizure. So
that sounds like an entertaining meal.
That's what I'm saying. It's quite amusing. I find it hilarious. So they're not thinking, what do I want to eat? They're literally tuning into what is aligned for my body right now, which I think is super cool. So it can be that simple. For me, I must be just pretty dense, because my inner pilot light communicates to me in other ways, often in external ways. Like I get a lot of my guidance through synchronicity.
Yeah, likewise.
And I love that because it's very playful. And it feels like the invisible forces of love out there are like messing with me. It's like hysterical. I have a good time. It's playing. It's like playful.
Right.
But I'm also a writer. So I've been a writer my whole life. So I have a lot of access to that channel with the muse. And so if I have a question, I can sit down and ask, and literally something comes through my fingers that feels like it bypasses my brain. I'm a very fast typist. And I'll read something that I didn't even think, and I definitely didn't make it up. And so that's a very powerful kind of connection for me. And that's where the Daily Flame emails came from, as I started making it part of my daily practice to wake up every morning and say, what does my inner pilot light want me to hear today? And I realized at some point that what was coming through me was probably helpful for somebody other than me. And it turned out it became very popular very quickly, because it turned out that what was coming through me was often very universal. People will read these daily emails and say, oh my God, how did you know? That's exactly what I needed to hear today.
That's beautiful. And I love the emphasis on I'm crafting as ever a morning routine and refining and so on. And I love the practicality and the power of that simple practice of actually asking and waiting to listen, whether it be through a somatic response or a synchronicity that shows up, or indeed the sort of channeled writing that you're describing.
Right. So I have I'm not kidding, I have about 30 practices like that. That that's why I say I must be so dense, because I'm envious of the people who only need one practice and they feel pretty confident that, their body's yes or no is yes or no. I don't ever feel confident that I know for sure this is my inner pilot light, and not some wounded part of me or some protective part of me that's hijacking the system and pretending to be my inner pilot light. Or some kind of, delusional or, fantasy part that is feeling like that. So, for example, when my husband proposed to me, we had not known each other very long, and this felt like a very risky move. I was really attracted to him and really feeling a lot of deep resonance, but my mind said, this is a very bad idea. And so I had a lot of resistance to getting married that early. And this is a clear opportunity for checking in with, is this aligned with my inner pilot light? And so for me, I did about 10 different practices that all responded with the same confirmation. in ways that were hilarious. Well, I mean, it was hysterical. Like I said, for me, this is very playful. So I'll give you an example. And one of the practices, and I teach all of these, I created an online program with my husband called Connect to Your Inner Pilot Light that is literally teaching these many practices that I use as ways of connecting to my inner pilot light. And one of them is super fun and playful. So I was using this one after he proposed to me, and I call it Pandora Roulette. So I love music, and music is often one of the ways that synchronicity will play with me. And so I have an iPod. I live in a place where there's no cell service. And so I have an iPod that has like thousands and thousands of songs on it. So I'll either do this with Pandora if I'm somewhere where there's cell service, or I'll do it with my iPod and put my iPod on random. But I will literally make it a prayer. I'll make it a prayer. Like I'm humbling myself before these invisible forces of love that know what's aligned for me better than my small human mind. And I'm asking for help. Help me know what's most right. And I will ask that the iPod or the Pandora will be used, and it will deliver me with a song that will help me to interpret the answer. So I literally, in the case of my proposal, I put my iPod on random. I put on my headphones, and the song is a song by Ben Lee that I've never even heard. I don't even know how it got on my iPod, called Whatever It Is. And over the song says, whatever it is, just do it. Whatever it is, just do it. They'll tell you that you're crazy. Whatever it is, just do it. And I'm literally in tears.
Yeah, right.
So, but I didn't trust just that one, because I could say, well, that was coincidence, right? Mm-hmm. So I invoke a dozen more practices that all give me the same answer. And at the end of the day, I go home and I tell my husband yes. Now, that does not mean, I want to make this clear, that does not mean things are going to go well. Right? I would like to have a way to gauge the future and make sure that I don't get hurt, and that I have a promise of unconditional love and compatibility and passion for the rest of my life with this man. I am far wiser than that. So, in other words, it may be aligned for us to get married and then get divorced.
Right. So it's telling you that right now it's the right decision to move forward.
Right now, this is the decision that is in the flow of the path of greatest growth, joy, I don't know, impact, purpose. Mm-hmm. Again, I won't get into the whole cosmology of why are we here, what is the point of being human, but I think it's related to that. I think there is, I don't believe in destiny. I don't believe there's like a fixed outcome and we either, get a gold star because we lived our aligned destiny or not. I think we have free will all the time. And I can choose to ignore my inner pilot light if I want to. And the times that I have, as you said, I have times where I got very clear guidance from my inner pilot light, and it was not what I wanted to hear, and I overrode it, and things went really bad, like really bad. So that's why I like to joke that I used to have blind faith, and now I have evidence-based faith, because after 12 years of orienting my life this way and using these practices to tune into this center of my being, and allow it to help guide my life, I have hundreds of stories of how unexpectedly beautiful things went when I followed my inner pilot light, even when it told me to do things that sounded crazy, like quit my job as a doctor. Mm-hmm. But I also have a lot of evidence that when I override that guidance, that things can go really off the rails. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost like sometimes I think we've been given a kind of grace period, and we can get away with violating the guidance for a while without anything really bad happening. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, and perhaps this is the way that people can be blessed by a brain tumor, for example, right? We might be blessed by the loss of a loved one. We might be blessed by a car accident. We might be blessed by any number of things that our minds will label as awful. But it's often what it takes to get our attention, to let us know that there are actually long-term consequences to violating our guidance. And if we would prefer a path of greater ease, then perhaps it would be wise for us to learn to stop overriding our knowing.
Right. And certainly as you were speaking to that, it's funny you mentioned blessed with a brain tumor, because it came into my mind that my experience of that diagnosis was, it was kind of like life had been trying to get my attention, or my inner pilot light had been trying to get my attention, and in more subtle ways, such that then eventually it took the brain tumor to really invite that shift of direction and shift in how I was living my life. And I love also how you take this scientific approach, because the cynical mind or the skeptical mind might sort of question the power or the validity of intuition, or of our inner pilot light, or our inner knowing. And I love how you bring that scientific approach of trying 10 different ways of inviting that input. And,
like I said, I'm a scientist, so I like evidence.
Right. And of course, the evidence is also there. In fact, I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Kelly Turner and Radical Remissions, one of my favorite books.
Oh, yes.
Recommend
Kelly and I were doing our research at the same time. When I was researching Mind Over Medicine, she was researching Radical Remission, and we were comparing notes.
Oh, that's brilliant. Because they're two books that I recommend most regularly, Mind Over Medicine and Radical Remissions. And one of the things that Kelly came to the conclusion of was that the commonality amongst those people that create outlier results, they'll all say different things or give emphasis to different aspects of the healing journey. But the one thing that united them all was following their intuition, following their inner pilot light, we could say, when it came to making decisions, when it came to treatment options. And you were touching also just on the need for community and connection. I wonder if you can just expand a little bit, go off on that thread in the process of self-healing as well.
Yeah, well, I did a comprehensive sort of analysis of it in a TED Talk that I gave called The #1 Public Health Issue Doctors Aren't Talking About, which was about all the scientific data linking loneliness and disease. And so, you know, we live in a country of, in the U.S., I'm from the U.S., and this is a country that was built on the pioneering spirit of the rugged individualist. And again, that pioneering spirit has kind of gone off the rails, I think, in the self-help world of you can do it yourself, and you don't need anybody, and you can be self-sufficient, and if you need anybody, then you're needy, and that means you're weak and dependent, all these negative things. But we are fundamentally and biologically tribal beings who are interdependent upon one another. And if you look at any of the indigenous villages that are still in existence, you'll see more of a modeling of how we as a species are meant to be living. For example, we are not meant to be living as single parents in an apartment, in a box, with our child alone, while we're also going to work every day. And, you know, that is so not a living condition that is conducive to health. Like, we're meant to be living with multiple caregivers, all caring for the children and swapping them back and forth, and everybody getting dinner ready together and living in community with, you know, with our own roles of how we're contributing, but in sacred reciprocity with one another, with nature, so that we are aware of our need of one another. And one of my dear friends, Charles Eisenstein, wrote a book called Sacred Economics about how the introduction of the money system has fundamentally disconnected us from our awareness that we need one another. We think, I don't need anybody. I don't need the baker. I can just buy bread. Right? So once we moved out of gift economy, where it was obvious where the sacred reciprocity was happening, and we moved into money, then we said, well, I don't need anything. I don't need others. I just need money. I don't even need friends. I can just hire a coach, right? We've started commoditizing things that should be free in a healthy community. And as a result, we've made people far more vulnerable to illness, and that's just at the cultural level. But on an individual level, I think this is always. It has always been that when somebody is sick, for example, or if somebody is mentally struggling, that they will go to the healer or the shaman, right? Like, we've always known that having somebody else to help hold space and facilitate a healing journey is part of the healing journey, and perhaps it's the very thing that teaches something that people may not even ever learn otherwise, which is that one of the things, and I don't like to make sweeping generalizations of this illness equals this personality trait or this, limiting belief or whatever. But it seems to me that many people who get quite sick prematurely, when I say prematurely, everybody's going to die someday. But when people are suffering with physical ailments before their time, it seems to me that often the illness has come as a way to interrupt a pattern of codependence or kind of overgiving, sort of martyr complex, where they're externally focused because of their trauma in childhood often, and they're focusing on meeting the needs of the others, and they're neglecting or violating or denying their own needs. And so illness is the first opportunity to teach them that it's okay to be needy. It's okay to be hurting. It's okay to need support. It's okay to have somebody else make your meal for you, or clean the dishes for you, or take you to your chemo appointment, or sit with you at the bedside and ask you how you're feeling. And for a lot of people who are ill, that is the hardest part, is to be seen as weak or vulnerable or needy or dependent. But I don't know how else those people would learn these lessons sometimes, because it's so ingrained in people's traumas. And if we don't get to the deep trauma healing work that gets to the core wounding of unworthiness that's often that's often underneath that tendency to overgive and deplete oneself as a way of earning your right to exist, that's a deep trauma. And so, illness gives people a chance to learn that. And not everybody even learns it then. But I think it's an opportunity. And sometimes if people are willing to learn that, and they learn, oh my God, the only way I'm going to go through this is if I have community. And if you look at cancer survival rates, the people who have 9 or more social contacts have far increased survival compared to people that have 4 or less. So this is not just, I'm not just making, a wild claim. There's tons of data, and I wrote a whole chapter about it in Mind Over Medicine. Like I said, I did a TED Talk about it as well, showing some of the data and demonstrating that loneliness is perhaps one of the greatest risk factors for disease.
It's an astonishing, I still remember when I first heard that and encountered the research and data that you've presented, and it makes so much sense. And also it's so out of the box that its message is just unspeakably important. And I speak to that from my own personal experience as a sort of hyper individual, taking care of myself, the journey that I've gone through in my own experience, and how important it has been to open up and yes, ask for help and be willing to receive help. It feels like that receiving piece is so important. We've made giving good for good reasons, of course. We want to be kind, generous, supportive members of society and members of relationships and communities and so on. But there's an essential piece in there to learn to and be willing to receive. And that feels to connect nicely with what you're pointing to with the inner pilot light, to receive the wisdom or receive the love or receive the care that's within us, or as you point to with synchronistic phenomena, can be observed in the world around us. There's just something unspeakably profound about opening up to that and being willing to receive that love and care that is around us. You know, Einstein had that question, he posited, I think he did actually say this from the research that I've done, that the most important question we can ask is the universe a friendly place? And from
that was what my book, The Fear Cure, revolved around, was that quote.
Right. Beautiful. And I think like what you're telling us is that physiologically, the data says that yes, it's a very, very important question, that our physiology will have a response either in the positive or the negative to how we are perceiving that. If we are experiencing and believing and feeling a friendly universe, then that's great for our health.
Absolutely. And it's more fun. I mean, it's not just great for our health. Like, it's great for our creativity. It's great for our relationships. It's great for our sex lives. It's great for the way that we interface with our environment and treat nature and all of that. I mean, it's built into the fundamental spiritual principle of most indigenous spirituality, which is this, like the Q'ero in Peru call it Aini. It's this sacred reciprocity, right? It's spiritual law that we cannot give more than we receive, and we cannot receive more than we give without having side effects. So when I run a training program for doctors and other healthcare providers called the Whole Health Medicine Institute. And most of them, because of their traumas and wounding, are suffering the consequences of giving more than they receive. And they've had that spiritualized or viewed as altruism. So they've, as you said, they've turned it into like, we're such generous giving people. We give until we're depleted, and that means we're good people going to heaven, or we're, loving people who are going to be good enough or something. And they're unaware that it often stems from a fundamental childhood wounding around not being good enough unless you prove your right to exist. It's a very fundamental kind of trauma. And so one of the first things I do with them when they come in is I say, okay, now we're all going to exhale together, but don't take a breath. Just exhale. We're going to see how long we can just exhale.
Right.
Right. And as you can imagine, this does not last very long.
Sure. Pretty powerful way of demonstrating that.
Yeah. We can't exhale for very long without taking an in-breath. But what makes us think in our careers, for example, that we can just exhale without taking an in-breath? And so my sort of cosmology is really built around this, because I also, and I don't know if this is true, I really don't know how the universe works. I'm not privy to the secrets of the mystery. But it seems to me that often we can't receive until we ask. There's a humility in that. And I think humility is one of the most fundamental properties that I look for if I'm using my discernment to assess whether someone is someone that I can trust. Right? Do they think they have it all figured out, and they're very, almost overly confident in their self-sufficiency or their certainty? But there's a humility that comes in the acknowledgement of how much I don't know, and how much I am not in control, and how much I feel uncertain. And if I can lean into that feeling of uncertainty with, instead of fear, if I can instead lean into it with humility and curiosity, where I'm now asking for more clarity, I'm asking for help feeling more certain, because I feel uncertain, I don't know. There's something that gets activated in that opens the portal for me to receive. And I think of the inner pilot light as that portal. It's like, now I have made that humble ask. Now the entire universe can send, like I said, it feels very playful for me, can send 30 different ways that I can get help. And I think the same is true in human relationships, right? So I went through, you know, what I went through a few years ago, in the past few years, Will, and I just went through, I think I counted like 12 back-to-back traumas, back-to-back in 3 years. And it was incredibly hardcore and very devastatingly painful. And I could not have made it through those 12 traumas without asking the people that I loved to help me. And I had a part that did not like doing that. I didn't have to do it through physical, well, I kind of did. The pit bull injury was one of them. But the level of discomfort that I felt in asking people to extend themselves in ways that felt outrageous, like it felt like I can't possibly ask that of somebody. And I had to do it over and over again. And I felt terribly uncomfortable with asking other people to extend themselves in order to help me through my crisis. But when the tables are turned, when somebody else is in crisis and they're asking me to extend myself to support them, I'm all over that. I'm all over that. I feel needed. I feel helpful. I feel appreciated. I feel grateful to have the opportunity to be in this intimate moment with somebody who's vulnerable. I feel close to them. I feel so, there's nothing I want more than to show up for my loved ones. And but when the tables are reversed, I was so uncomfortable, Will. I was so, ow, 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 ow. I hate this feeling. And I felt really vulnerable because I also felt like, well, what if they all reject me? But what a beautiful blessing, to use your sort of blessed by a brain tumor, like blessed by trauma. It took that much to show me that I am not alone and that my loved ones are here for me and I can lean on them and I can ask for what I need and they want to help me. They want to show up for me as much as I want to show up for them. And the ones that didn't, the ones that didn't want to show up for me, they fell away and I got to see what was true.
Right. And it feels like a helpful distinction that you're offering, that in being willing to ask for help and receive, we're actually in a roundabout way serving, because it does feel great when we are giving. So
that's what I mean. I mean, it feels, to me, it's a gift of intimacy. Right? If somebody trusts me enough to come to me with something really vulnerable and painful, and I'm given the privilege of having a front row seat on something that's really tender for them, that is a gift of intimacy. I really got to see it from the other side, how I chose the people that I asked for help from. Like, the people that I asked for help from were the people that I trusted. And I was willing to be seen at my most vulnerable. Think about, I don't know how this has been for you, Will, but for a lot of people when they're going through treatment for a tumor or cancer, for example, there's a real tenderness in, like, who do you invite to the hospital with you? Who's going to see you with your head shaved? Who's going to see you post-operatively when you're groggy from the anesthesia and you're puking your guts out? Like, who are you going to invite if you're going to get chemotherapy? Who will you let see you that week? That's tender part of intimacy. And I'm very aware of the part of me that wants to be viewed as always strong, always in control, always competent, I've always got my shit together. And so I don't want people to see me looking weak and vulnerable. And you were one of the first people, I actually let you video me in that place.
Yeah, right. That was a powerful conversation. Yeah.
Whew. Yeah, I was like, what am I hiding? What am I hiding? I'm having a human experience of grief right now. Why am I afraid to cry on camera?
I think the power of that for so many people watching and this is that truth that is, in my experience, I think many people reflect this, that when we are able to be vulnerable, I think the reason we love vulnerability so much is because it models how we want to be. We want to be fearless. We want to be able to be ourselves without fearing rejection. And so just as our receiving is service, it helps people give and have that gift of giving, our vulnerability allows people to connect with that receiving in themselves as well. And yeah, it does seem that illnesses rather compel us to, or traumas compel us to receive. I can see that still being an edge for me to continue to open to help and inviting people in to support me. Yeah, for sure.
I tell you, Will, I hate that this is my conclusion, because I really like being self-sufficient and strong and in control. I like being perceived that way. And I see all the ways that all the ways that I made bids for strength and power in the world to try to prove that I have control over life and death by becoming a doctor, or by writing books that are New York Times bestsellers, or giving TED Talks or whatever, so I can be perceived as I've got it all together. Right? But I don't. I really don't. I still don't. Like, I'm pretty much a hot mess a lot of the time. And the people that I've allowed to see me in my, out of my public role, I try, even in my public role, to let people see that part of me. But I also see where, we can edit that a bit. We can even milk that, right? I can pretend to be vulnerable so that I can get more people who read my book, right? Like, it's subtle, the ways that we can kind of hide. And so going through all these traumas in the past few years, really, like, now I can say that the people that I'm close to, I'm really close to. Because they saw me through some of the hardest things I've ever, this is the hardest 3 years of my life. And they stayed with me, and some of them didn't stay with me. Some of them really were in relationship with me because maybe they had a mommy projection or something. They needed me to be a strong mommy or a strong friend. And if I was weak, Lissa, then they didn't trust me. They didn't feel safe. They're like, wait a minute, you changed the rules. You're supposed to be my pillar of strength, and you're not supposed to need anything from me. And so some of my relationships that I thought were the people that were closest to me really fell away. But the relationships that survived my crisis, oh my God, Will, I'm so lucky. I'm so blessed. I'm so grateful for the people that are still here, and for the new ones that showed up during that time to show me that I do deserve care, and I do deserve to be taken care of as much as I've cared for others. And I have cared for others a lot. So that means this is quite exciting. I want to reframe this, because we're talking about the discomfort of receiving help, but I also want to reframe it. I had an epiphany about 3 years ago. I was kind of in the middle of some of this hard stuff, but I had this epiphany that I had like a PhD in unconditional love. Like, I can love anybody through anything, throw it at me, and I'm on it. Like, I have my capacity to tolerate triggers and work through them and appreciate the soul growth and all of that. Like, I got a PhD. I'm graduating from this crap. But I realized I was in kindergarten. Like, I had not even started on giving that quality of unconditional love to all of my own wounded parts, all of the disowned, exiled parts inside of myself. And I was re-traumatizing those parts in the name of unconditionally loving other people. And I realized I had this just huge, like, I saw a blind spot that I just had not seen. And I felt embarrassed about a lot of the blogs that I had written, because my blind spot is evident in some of my public writing. And I realized that I had a whole, like, I was good at giving. I was masterful at giving. And I was in kindergarten when it came to receiving. And that felt really vulnerable and scary. And I was like, oh my God, I'm only halfway up the mountain here, if that. And there's a whole journey on my spiritual path that is about receiving. And it is about pleasure. And it's about how much ecstasy can I tolerate? How much support can I tolerate? How much mystical experiences and financial abundance? How much juicy sex? How much having people shower me with gifts and blessings? Like, how much can I tolerate? And I realized that my tolerance was extremely low.
Right.
And I actually would have a panic attack. Like, really, I'm not kidding. Like, full on somatic, like my nervous system would fire into threat when too much abundance, too many blessings were hitting me all at once. And I had to go to my therapist right away. I am regularly in therapy. Like I said, I'm a hot mess. I've been in therapy for 10 years and I'm not done. And I had to go to my therapist and say, well, I have a real problem. I see that I am energetically blocking blessings because I'm too uncomfortable with having too many good things happen to me all at once. Like Gay Hendricks calls it the upper limit. I have an upper limit. Mm-hmm. And my upper limit is pretty low. And that's hilarious, right? Like, I'm actually blocking blessings because some part of me is actually like masochistic. Mm-hmm. Like, give me the painful stuff and I can milk it for all it's worth and alchemize it into soul growth.
Yeah,
but the pleasurable stuff.
So relate to that. It's an important distinction, isn't it?
It's part of why I'm bringing it up with you, Will, because it was such a blind spot for me. And I realized, like, this is going to be the fun part. I've done the really hard part. I took 12 back-to-back traumas and milked it for every last bit of soul growth. But I'm still working on receiving pleasure and blessings and ease and joy and light and magic and play and connection and touch and safety and yum. Mm-hmm. And my husband is my best teacher. He's a tantra teacher.
How perfect.
And he's from south of France. He's from Nice. He's like the master of pleasure.
Of course.
So I called in the right person, right? And and that, I think I have really needed the support of my inner pilot light to show me that blind spot, for example, to reorient me so that I can have the humility to see how handicapped I've been in my life and how kind of off track I've been in my overgiving. And fortunately, at least at this point, it didn't have to result in a brain tumor.
Yeah, right.
But it resulted in plenty of other, difficult traumas. And I definitely got the wake-up call.
Yeah, I hear you.
And I'm on it, but I'm definitely not. There's not that I believe that there's a there, but if there is a there, I'm not there. I'm on the journey.
Yeah, I'm very much. I've had the sense recently of really actually just. So in some ways, I received the wake-up call and acted on the wake-up call, and a huge amount of transformation and healing and life change occurred 8 years ago. But I've had a sense recently that I'm really just beginning to heed that wake-up call or really respond to that wake-up call. And I love the message that you're offering us in this conversation, because that deepening into receiving more fully, more completely, more unconditionally, surrendering, yes, to the joy, and moving beyond that, learning through the challenge and difficulty, as beautiful a capacity as that is. I hear the call for that soul growth, for that evolution and giving through learning to receive more fully and be in connection and so on.
Absolutely. And some people have the opposite lesson that they learn. I work largely with healers and healthcare providers and spiritual teachers and such. And so those people have a strong tendency to give more than they receive. But if you look at other professions or other communities of people, then some people, illness comes to teach them the opposite, right? They actually need to learn to give because they've been maximizing their self-interest their whole life. They've been very sort of focused. And I think it's a different way of responding to the same childhood trauma. So we might label those people as narcissists, right? We might call them president in this country. Some people create defense systems or protective systems around their childhood trauma by just fully thinking of themselves and not caring about anybody else, not feeling any compassion for the impact of their actions on other people or on the planet. And this makes people capable of sociopathic behavior, of really causing great harm to other people or to nature, and not feeling any remorse about it. And so for some people, the wake-up call comes to teach them to reorient towards service. And there are great case studies in the medical literature of people with quote-unquote incurable illnesses who suddenly started orienting towards service. I'm thinking about Andy Mackey, for example. This is a guy that had like 7 heart surgeries, and he was taking like 9 drugs for this severe heart condition. And his doctors had told him that if he stopped the medications, he would die within a year. And he was having so many side effects from the heart medications that he decided this is no life worth living. And he decided he would just save the money. They were very expensive. And he would take the money that he was spending every month on heart medications and do something he'd always wanted to do. And so he used that money to buy harmonicas for children in the public school systems. And he started distributing these harmonicas and teaching harmonica lessons in the public schools. And he started a whole nonprofit around this. He ended up teaching like thousands and thousands of children and giving away thousands of harmonicas. And he lived, I don't know, another decade after quitting his heart medications. And so there are lots of case studies in the literature about people who oriented towards service and had miraculous healings. But my theory is that those are the people that were receiving more than they were giving. Mm-hmm. Because if you tell that same story to a bunch of sick doctors, they're all going to go, okay, I've got to give more.
Right.
Now I've got to go teach harmonica lessons to, impoverished children.
And with that polarity and paradox, the importance of a reliable guidance system is emphasized, right? Because
absolutely,
like, which one?
Absolutely,
connecting with our own inner pilot light.
Absolutely. So part of my personal practice, for example, because I'm aware of my tendency to give more than I receive, is that I have a practice of deeply checking in with my inner pilot light for every request that someone gives to me to help them. And in the position that I'm in, I have probably 100 requests from people who want me to help them per day. Mm-hmm. So I kind of joke that I've become a professional disappointer. Because it's, like I have to disappoint, 98 people a day. And these are beautiful people. I mean, some of them are like, hi, I'm 15 and I'm working on my school project. Can you help me with my project? Yeah. I hate disappointing people. And every one of the people that I disappoint are like beautiful people doing beautiful things like you. Mm-hmm. But everybody wants me to endorse their book, help promote their program, help them cure their cancer, help their husband cure their cancer. Everybody wants something from me. Sure. And so I've had to learn how to, first of all, be aware of the ways that I can get hooked into giving when I'm not resourced, mm-hmm. or giving more than I receive. So I know, for example, that I can get hooked by my savior complex. Right? I know that I can get hooked by how much I hate disappointing people. I know I can get hooked by wanting to impress somebody. Mm-hmm. I know all these ways that I can get hooked. So I'm on to myself. And I'm aware of those hooks because my inner pilot light has shown me mm-hmm. where I'm blind. And I'm sure I still have hooks that I'm blind to that I haven't seen yet, but I know a lot of my previous blind spots are no longer blind. So it comes down to a moment-to-moment practice now, where every time somebody is asking something of me, I just check in yes or no. Mm-hmm. Am I resourced? Is part of my discernment. Am I resourced for this in this moment? So when you ask me, will I do this? Yes, I get a yes. But I really like you, Will, so it might have been hard if my answer was no, then I would have had to do the uncomfortable thing and say, you know what, I really care about what you're doing and I hate to disappoint you, but I'm not resourced for that.
Yeah, right.
And healthy people will support you. Congratulations. Thank you for modeling good boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see it with yourself and others who are in a position of public, what's I was going to say notoriety, but that's not the right word, of fame, let's say. There are lots of people that know that you're a powerful person with wisdom, with capacity to assist. And I see it with others in a similar position, that's a real edge, and just from a practical perspective, a necessary daily practice to learn how to consistently say no.
I think I had to get to a point where it was impossible to say yes. And in the beginning, I was really burning the candle at both ends and neglecting my child, neglecting my body, neglecting my marriage, terrible self-sacrifices and harm to others in the name of, well, but I'm such a good, generous, loving, giving person who supports everybody who wants something from me. And I wasn't seeing the little girl that was just begging to be finally good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not easy to interrupt those tendencies that we may have to give when we're not resourced. So that's a word that I use a lot. So when I ask, let's say I'm making a request from someone, I have a book coming out now. So this is a time where people that I have helped in the past could help me support my book launch. But I also never want somebody else to deplete themselves in order to help me. So one of the ways that I communicate with my people is I say, hey, I have a need. Are you resourced to help me meet my need? And in my household, that's how we talk. Mm-hmm. I say, hey, I'm having a craving for green juice. I just said this to my housemate. Are you resourced to make me some green juice? Because I'm doing interviews all day. She's like, oh yeah, I'm totally resourced to make you green juice. Thank you for trusting me with your request. Mm-hmm. And if she had said, I'm not resourced, that would have been equally valid. Mm-hmm. So we're practicing in our small little community here how to ask for what we need and how to give when we're resourced. Right. So that there's sacred reciprocity and nobody's giving more and nobody's receiving more and everybody's getting their needs met. And that to me is true interdependence. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we're at risk of linking into what my therapist calls symbiotic relationships, or what some people might call the sort of narcissist codependent pairing, where one person is giving and the other person is receiving, and it's out of balance. So the person who's giving too much is feeling resentful, and the person who's receiving too much is, not reciprocating and is often quite narcissistic. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we don't want that. And so we're all really working on it, on our own little community to find that balance point of sacred reciprocity. And to me, that act of choosing to live in our family community together that way is an act of global healing. How do we heal the planet? Well, sacred reciprocity. We can't take more from the planet than we give to the planet. We can't exhale. We can't inhale from the planet without exhaling. So and the same is true for humanity, right? We can't be hoarding resources when others are depleted of resources. Mm-hmm. It's not ethical. Again, we're talking about spiritual law here. So no single human needs to have 3 cars. I don't care how much you like cars. No single human needs to have a Ferrari and a Lamborghini and an SUV. Mm-hmm. And there are people that don't even have food on the table, right? So if we're willing to trust that sacred reciprocity actually feels good. It feels good when we're in reciprocity with other humans, with animals, with nature, with the natural world, with the cosmos. Last night I was watching the full lunar eclipse, and I just was crying with the beauty of feeling the connection to this moon, right? That living in reciprocity with the world feels better than the scarcity-based need for hoarding and greed and, fear that operates so much of our culture. But now I'm getting into the territory of my other book, The Fear Cure, of our worldview and how our worldview and our cultural conditioning is making us sick.
Yeah, it feels like sacred reciprocity is a beautiful point to crescendo and complete on. I want to serve your needs in knowing that you have a hike scheduled to
I do.
as part of your book launch. And I want to thank you for giving so generously. And it's been personally beneficial for me. A lot of the teaching and wisdom you've shared, I'm going to be applying into my day to day. And I'm sure that's true for our listeners as well. And I wish you well with the launch of the Daily Flame, and people can pre-order that on your website as well as all the usual places, lissarankin.com. And thank you so much for being with us today, Lissa. I do appreciate it deeply.
Actually, the best place to pre-order it is all the information is on innerpilotlight.com, which is the Daily Flame, like the 10-year daily email that I've been giving. So that has all of the kind of pre-order bonuses and all of the links to all of the different booksellers that sell the book and all of that. So that's the better website for that one. LissaRankin.com has all of my TED Talks and my other programs from the Whole Health Medicine Institute and my blog. But
so
we have a separate website, innerpilotlight.com.
Fantastic. And as you say, there's lots of free gifts there as well as the book available for pre-order, so people can
I created this online program, Connect to Your Inner Pilot Light, that is free right now if people pre-order 3 copies of the books until February 12th. And after that, it'll be for sale. And it's all those tools and practices that I was talking about for kind of seeking confirmation to make aligned decisions. So can I close with one little reading?
Please. Thank you.
Yeah, because so the Daily Flame is actually a daily devotional. It's written so that you could start it at any time of the year and read one per day in order. And it's written as a sort of intentional journey. So it's written in the order that it's in for a reason. Mm-hmm. But what I'm finding is a lot of people are using it as an oracle, kind of like a tarot deck. Mm-hmm. And they're just asking the book to tell them, what is my inner pilot light need me to hear today? So when I've been doing interviews for the book, I've been just sort of asking the book to tell me which one is wanted for this interview. So my inner pilot light just chose love letter number 45. So I'm going to read it. My darling, did you know that no is a complete sentence? Saying yes out of a misguided sense of obligation can feel icky and sticky, like wading through murky, dark swamp waters. Saying yes from a place of self-sacrifice can feel powerless and forced, ultimately making you feel small, weak, and unworthy. Ew. Saying yes from fear of rejection or panic under pressure leaves you feeling needy, grasping, and desperate. Ouch. Saying yes from a place of pure giving light and an overflowing abundance of love, time, energy, money, and good intentions lights my fire like nobody's business. To this kind of soul-led yes, I sing a rousing chorus of holy hallelujahs. I give you full permission to only say yes when you mean it. Remember, saying no to others means saying yes to you. Hell yeah, your inner pilot light. See, I'm like tickled that that's the one that got picked after our conversation today.
That's perfect. And just to be clear, that was your inner pilot light that selected that rather than a logical flow on, because it was also a logical flow on from our conversation.
No, I did not plan that. I just picked up the book and I opened it intuitively to where the book wanted me to read from it.
There's our playful universe once again.
That's what I mean. This tickles me. This is how I laugh at life a lot because, I did not plan that and I haven't memorized the book, so I couldn't have even found it quickly enough if I had remembered that I had written it. Mm-hmm. But that's part of what it's like. It's like the universe starts playing with you, and it's delightful. Mm-hmm. So that's my word of the year. I always pick a word of the year at New Year's, and my word of the year this year is delight.
Delight. Well, it's been a delight being with you today. I'm sure it will be a delightful hike for you and a delightful read for everyone to
thank you, dear. I appreciate you, and thank you to everybody who's listening for even considering living an inner pilot light-led life. It's quite courageous. It takes a lot of courage to be obedient to your guidance, because what you'll discover is that you're probably already getting guidance and you're ignoring it or denying it, as you were talking about, Will, like your guidance has been trying to get your attention in all kinds of ways before it has to get really extreme. And so it takes a lot of courage, which is why I think we need a lot of delight and pleasure and comfort and nurture and support and community so that we can be brave enough to actually be obedient to what we're being guided to do. So I just want to honor that I understand and I get it, that it's not an easy journey, but it is deeply fulfilling and full of awe and mystery and wonder and magic, and it's worth it. That's my conclusion, at least for myself.
Amen and aho. Yeah.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lissa, and thank you to all our listeners. Please visit loveandtruthparty.org to join our community and download or order love letters, register for our newsletter, connect on social media, and even consider a financial gift at loveandtruthparty.org. Thank you to all our supporters and contributors. Together we are creating kind, conscious, courageous human community.